Good afternoon. Sorry about the forced start. I think you might have been. We're running 10 minutes late, so that's my fault for not pressing one of the buttons. So sorry if you've been hanging in there. Well, thank you for hanging in there. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar, which is entitled "What Magazines Can Learn from the Newsroom." My name is James Evely. I'm the editor of In Publishing, and I'll be moderating today's session. This is our first roundtable webinar. So hopefully you can see as well as hear us. With cost pressures continuing to mount across the industry, I think it's very important that publishers, when they successfully manage to make efficiency savings, that they share their learnings with the rest of the industry, with their peer group. So the purpose of today's webinar is to look at some of the major changes newspaper publishers have made in the last 5 years. And then to see how magazine publishers can learn from those changes. We're going to have a 30-minute discussion. Again, apologies for slightly starting late, but we are going to have a 30-minute discussion. That'll be followed by a 10-minute Q&A. If you want to ask any questions to our panel during the Q&A, then all you need to do is type the question into the panel in front of you at any time during the webinar. I will then collate the questions and put as many of them as possible to the panel during the Q&A. I won't read out the names of the people asking the questions, just the questions themselves. I'd like to thank PCS, our sponsors for today. Without them, this webinar wouldn't have taken place, so a big thank you to them. They are the creators of the Knowledge Editorial Management Platform, so if you want to discuss content management in all its forms, then please do get in touch with them. Their website is on the panel in front of you. And now, without further ado, I'd like to ask each of our panel to briefly introduce themselves and to also tell us what they think the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity is facing the industry. Martin, if we could start with you, please.
Thanks very much. Well, I'm Martin Wright, editor of the Shropshire Star, which is a 3-edition daily newspaper which sells about 27,000 copies a day. I'm also responsible for a series of 8 weekly newspapers. We also produce a glossy monthly magazine and various niche publications as well. I've been the editor of the Star since 2013, and during that time I've overseen the introduction of a template-driven workflow to the newsroom. And that's enabled us to make substantial savings in the amount of resource that we dedicate to the production process in the newsroom, the subbing and the page design. And I guess for me, one of the key challenges and opportunities facing the publishing industry is trying to successfully navigate a path that allows us to adjust our business model to recognise the changes brought about by the digital revolution, if you like, but also recognise that print is vital to our future. So for me, the challenges and the opportunities are utilising technology to enable us to reduce costs in the process side while maintaining our USP as a serious regional newspaper, which is protecting the content and ensuring that the end product to readers is as good as it can possibly be. So I think that's the key challenge for me is just getting that balance, and it's a delicate balance, right between making the efficiencies that we need to make and also protecting the bit that's really crucial to our businesses in print and in digital, which is the content.
Thank you, Martin. Sean, over to you.
I'm Sean Briggs. I run Creative Workflows, which is a consultancy looking after all sizes of publishers, design groups and art organisations. The emphasis here is looking at the creative teams, trying to help them to become more productive and hopefully give a little bit more time to be more creative as well. I've worked in publishing for 30 years. A good deal of that was at Hearst. I spent 20-odd years there, and my responsibilities there were looking after the editorial workflow systems, setting those up and making sure they work well, the production systems and the advertising workflows, implementing asset management and everything that entails, including online commissioning systems and rights management, responsible for bringing pre-press in-house, and then I guess the last task was looking after the production of digital editions, making sure all the brands were represented on the apps and on all of the devices. That means I've got this broad experience, and then the last 5 years I've been working with different sizes of publishers, but also some vendors, helping them change their systems so that they work well with magazines. And I guess from my perspective, the biggest challenge facing magazines is one that they've had for a little while, which is how to monetize this vast digital audience that are interested in their content, and doing that while still maintain the quality and the validity of print magazines. And it's moving really, I guess, from a print-centric workflow to a content-first workflow, so that print and digital work together. The opportunity, as I say, I think is vast. These audiences are measured in millions rather than thousands, and they are interested in good editorial content.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sean. And you, David, please.
Good afternoon. My name is David Whaley. I'm the managing editor at the Oldham Evening Chronicle, just north of Manchester. It's a frightening 38 years in the industry for me, including 15 years at the Birmingham Post and Mail. I became the editor of my hometown paper here in Oldham in 2010, following from a man who'd given me my first job in the industry at the age of 18. I added the role of managing director 3 years later, though I have to say I've got no desires to be the MP for Tatton anytime soon. We're an independent publisher. We produce a daily product with other monthly titles, and we have some new magazines in the business and education sectors. I lost my vocal cords to throat cancer in 2015, hence the croaky voice and my impression of Davros with the headset on. You'll see me drinking regularly to keep talking. I can assure you that's tea. It's only gin at the weekends. But losing my voice and the ability to shout and sing does not stop me talking up for the industry. Whilst monetizing digital is important, I too think that we concentrate too much at our peril if we turn that to the only thing we think about, and we need to champion print in all its forms. The opportunity is to be the preferred creator and the option for both advertisers and for readers.
Excellent. Thank you, panel. Before we start looking at some of the changes which Martin and David have made in their respective newsrooms, I think we need to kind of set the scene a bit. So, Sean, if we could start with you, could you give us your insight into the current state of play in the magazine editorial department?
Yeah. So I'm still quite active in consumer magazine publishing, and that's of varying sizes from publishers who've got 70 titles to ones that have just got 1 or 2. And there is a common theme here, and the theme is teams under pressure. And the pressure comes from rounds of cost cutting because the print numbers have declined. So the first reaction by the finance team is, let's reduce the staff numbers and let's give those people who remain extra responsibilities, and those responsibilities tend to be digital responsibilities. So you suddenly find art and subs who are having to produce content that's going into Facebook articles and tweets and into the app, which may look different to the digital edition. And they're not always given the training they need, and they don't have all the tools they need. So you end up with this uncomfortable structure which is geared up for print, and they've been doing print forever, for 100 years in some cases, and certainly 30 years since desktop publishing came out. And they haven't yet had the opportunity to move to a workflow that supports both print and digital. It tends to be it's print and then digital is an afterthought. And I see that in lots of different places. I'd say that editorial are under greater pressure than I've ever seen in the 30 years I've been working with editorial teams, and that comes at a cost. It's a cost to the individuals, but it's also a cost to the products they're producing. The focus tends to be, let's get the content out before the next round starts, instead of perhaps producing the best possible content that they can. What I hope is By listening to the newspaper people, we can see how efficiencies can come in, which give back some of that time to be more creative. And sometimes it's simple things like the communications between teams isn't as good as it ought to be. More often than not, when I go into a magazine, the print people are quite separate to the digital people, often in different buildings, and that communication is just not happening. And I think if they worked more collaboratively, it would help. Data analysis is useful, but again, that tends to live in the digital area and rarely comes back to the print. And yet the print people could learn what their consumer audience want. So again, it's an improvement in communications. And with small magazines, they still struggle on how to schedule all of this content going out, both print and digital. How do I get my content to coordinate and go out, because they don't have systems in place.
Excellent, thank you, Sean. And Martin, if we were to kind of that's the magazine world, what is the current state of play in the newspaper newsroom?
Well, it sounds relatively similar to the outline really that Sean's given in some ways, although I think we're probably a little bit further down in our journey from sort of a purely print focused operation towards a more sort of multimedia operation, if you like. I think for us, we now have quite an extensive digital operation now, so we're breaking news 24/7, and that's changed the priorities of the newsroom considerably. But for us as a newspaper, and I think we may be relatively unusual in this sense, the printed product is still an absolute priority for us as well. So the challenge for us in the newsroom today is making sure that we're able to feed the digital channels, but we're also able to maintain the quality of our newspaper itself and make sure that the service we're providing to readers is as good as it can possibly be. To that end, and the pressures that Sean mentioned are very much felt in the newspaper industry as well. We've had to become more efficient, and unfortunately that has meant that we've had to make cuts in our numbers. So today the sort of focus of our newsroom is our content desk. Our news desk, as was, now populated by content managers who are tasked with choosing page templates, news editing copy, dropping that copy onto the pages, which then automatically drops into a queue to be picked up by our centralised sub-import, which subs our copy and copy for our sister papers. And this use of templates, which we'll talk about in a bit more detail later on, that allows us to fill pages extremely quickly, and it removes several steps from the workflow that we had going back 4 or 5 years, whereby news editors would take copy from reporters, they'd write out on a piece of paper the catch line of that story. When they'd written enough catch lines on a piece of paper, they'd then hand that over to a chief sub. The page would be drawn up from scratch. The sub-editor would then go and find the copy in whichever folder the news editor had put it in, frequently the wrong one, and they then drop that copy onto the page, which would then be sent to downtable subbing. So what we've done with our workflow is take several of those steps out while maintaining the checks that we believe are necessary to make sure the quality is still there, and that's allowed us to make significant changes. And I think the other thing that's sort of helped us with is that we're planning ahead more and more using this templated system. And what that's also done, because that's enabled us to make some savings and some efficiencies, that's enabled us to protect our reporting numbers. So for me, one of the priorities is that while the newsroom has changed dramatically, and it's certainly a lot leaner than it was, the reporting numbers have been protected, and that means the impact on the end product is limited, because obviously it's the content that sells our papers, it's the content that drives people to our website, and we've been able to protect that.
Lovely. David, before we start looking in more detail at the actual changes, I think it's important to put it in context, to see where the newspaper newsroom was a few years ago before you started to make the changes. So if you could kind of wind the clock back, what did the newsroom look like about 5 years ago?
Well, two things came to mind to me fairly immediately. There were certainly more people in the newsroom 5 years ago, and the other thing that struck me was that the computers on the desk back then were absolutely massive, and you could hide behind them. 5 years ago, we'd a very traditional news workflow with the old trusty chief sub as king, a mountain of photocopied picture prints under his trusty block. Around him was a team of designers, and despite sort of limitations of an archaic OS 9 and quote 3.32, they had the freedom to draw boxes to their heart's content, really. Across the Great Divide, it was actually probably about 2 yards, but it might as well have been about a mile, with the reporters and the news desk at the point. And then on the other side, there was the picture editor, who always seemed to have too many computers around him for me to be healthy. Every image seemed to need tweaking before he could possibly allow us to print it. And we have to remember that all chief subs I've ever worked with have had chief subs disease. I actually was one once myself, and I know it can be very infectious. They're never happy. Either they've far too much stuff and too tight a book to get everything in, or there's acres of room and nothing to put in it. A happy medium never really existed for that chief sub 5 years ago. The reporters only spoke to the sub-editors. As Sean said, communication. They only ever spoke when they absolutely had to explain something or complain to each other. And they complained about each other all the time, either for providing below standard text or for rewriting stuff and making it worse than it was in the first place. 5 years ago, many of our newsrooms around the world would be a hive of activity first thing in the morning, and that day's edition would be put to bed or updated. Most have lost the ability to do that now with overnight, favouring instead to place their content there on the website. I can see the tears of the diehards now missing out on a scoop because the presses are rolling in the middle of the night. We're actually one of those that still prints on the day, and I can tell you that the thrill of changing up never diminishes. But looking at what we're doing 5 years ago, as I said, the other big change is the kit. We now carry our laptops everywhere we go, stick them in a docking station, link up to desk monitors, and off we go. 5 years ago, we had the giants on the desk, and I do mean giants, Apple mics that were barricades to hide behind. Some of the reporters wouldn't be seen from one day, week or year to the next, and the odd expletive coming from behind them would probably tell you they were actually at home. The hidden reporter did remind you of the great story of the journalist who had 2 identical jackets, one of which he wore and the other one was hanging on the back of his chair to cover the fact that he so frequently went to the district office, which was also known as the pub. That was probably a bit of all our yesterdays, but the bar train journalist, or BTJ as I used to know him, is very much an endangered species. Back to you, James.
Thank you, David. Now let's look at some of the changes you and Martin have made. So we've kind of condensed some of the changes you made into kind of 4 areas. David and Martin will take 2 each. Martin, if we could start with you. I know you want to look at the whole area of templating, and in particular, what did the introduction of templating and how did it make a difference?
Well, I think the key thing for us is that templates have enabled us to pull pages together more rapidly than we've ever been able to before. And obviously, a crucial part of that is being able to do it with significantly fewer people. And, you know, as I say, that's an unfortunate necessity in the modern newspaper world. But as I also mentioned, that reduction in staff numbers has hopefully been behind the scenes, so that when you get to the readers and the product that they pick up or that is pushed through their door every day, they don't notice that there has been that huge change, which we've seen in the newsroom, from a non-template driven workflow to a completely template driven workflow. And as I say, you know, the other really important spin-off of the introduction of templates for me has been that that's allowed me to keep reporting resource at a level that still enables us to fill our newspaper and our website every day. One of the less obvious, I think, benefits of moving to templates, certainly less obvious to me when we set out on this, is that our pages tend to be now of a more consistent standard than they were previously. Yeah. I mean, in effect, we were working from templates before, although we never really recognised it. because we draw those pages up, as Dave said, we'd be drawing boxes up till our hearts were content every day. But page 5 always looked like page 5 the day before, and the day before that, and the day before that, pretty much. But what you did find previously was that depending which designer picked up that page, you would have subtle variations in quality. And as Dave will know, a good editor will be able to spot straight away which sub has designed which page. When you move to templates, obviously those variances are much more restricted because you're basing it upon the quality of the templates. And what we found is if you get the templates right, you have a very consistently high quality level of pages. That said, we don't template every single page in the paper. What we tend to do now is identify 2 or 3 pages in each edition which we want to turn into our showpiece page. Typically that might be the front page and a spread inside. So there's still plenty of creativity and there's still plenty of room to have impact, but we focus those energies because of the savings we're able to make by using the templates. And if anything, I would probably say that the look and the impact of our paper has improved since we switched to templates. And I think the final thing, just briefly, in terms of benefits, is a very practical one which might appeal to the accountants, if any are listening, and that's that the introduction of templates has meant that we no longer need every sub and every designer to have an InDesign or Quark Express license. So we've reduced now on our news desk, which is where the pages are all put together, we have 2 InDesign licenses currently to do a 3-edition daily newspaper. And I strongly suspect that in the next few months that might come down to 1 InDesign license. So there are some practical savings to be made as well there.
Thank you, Martin. David, can you tell us a bit about your experiences using partner hubs, third-party partner hubs?
Yeah, well, I think I need to be brutally honest here. I don't know about some, but in our case, this was driven out of necessity rather than choice. We were looking to upgrade our old system. We needed something new, and we were looking at the ways of getting this forward. But with many of the systems we looked at, the change was very much like for like. It was when we came across a system that offered the potential for third-party working that the numbers began to move. Economies of scale are not something that I have in much supply as an independent publisher, and the idea of shared resource in this and other areas of the business have made real economic sense. I made no secret of the fact that we've had to change the way we do things. When I was handed the additional role of MD, I made it clear to all the staff in the building that the quest was to make us as a business back into profit and a sustainable position. The staff knew that that meant that not all of us were going to stay through the choppy waters, but the alternative was that the ship sank and that all the jobs were lost. We still face challenges, but it goes without saying that the savings made with this switchover were significant. What pleased and amazed me in equal portions was the professionalism of all in making the transition. Those who were to lose their jobs, some senior people and good friends who've given decades of service to the industry, worked on the old system to the end, while those training worked on getting their skills up. Then when we went live, the patience of the third-party subbing hub came into its own. They helped us hit deadlines right from day one, just about, I would add. I visited the third-party team before we got going and told them we saw them very much as an extended and vital part of the Chronicle family. Of course, there were some early issues of style, but that was nothing that couldn't be overcome if we were pragmatic and adult about it. Communication is the key, be it comments on stories to give the copy editors at distance guidance of extra information, or a hotline through from designers to copy editors. As the telecom giant once said, it's good to talk. We use an internal messaging system within the signed-on team, and this builds a rapport. You might as well be sat next to each other. We've recently undergone an audit and refreshed our templates. As Martin said, the templates are very important to be right. We got some of them wrong in kick-off. They're better now. The audit has proved invaluable in making them much more reliable to use, caused the copy editors far fewer issues, and where they were wrongly linked, they were not linked at all. I know some will argue that we've lost local knowledge by opting for a third party. To some extent that is true, but I would argue, like Martin said earlier, that the old system, our copy went through the eyes of reporter, news editor, chief sub, designer, and there were still literals on the page when it landed on my desk. They were there in the original article. None of us is perfect. Above all, I think third party works. The third party team are present in numbers when the copy needs moving. We are early, far often more than we are late, and on the rare occasion we are late, it's often down to a computer malfunction rather than human intervention.
David, thank you very much. Martin, back to you. Can you talk us through the benefits of a centralised workflow?
Yes, certainly. I mean, we now operate a news desk, as I mentioned before, which is staffed by what we call content managers, and they're individuals from both news editing and a sub or design background. And by combining the skill sets of these individuals, we've been able to shift the whole focus of our department really back onto the quality of the content itself rather than on the processing element. And so for us, because everything now flows through that content desk, the people sat on that desk are better able to consider where the content should appear in the paper. Previously, when we had the separate news desk and the subs desk and the designers and so on that we've already mentioned, story placement was quite often driven by what I would call the production momentum. So you'd have a chief sub saying, I need more copies for page 16, and you'd have stories that were pushed out to page 16 that really should have been on page 4 or 5, simply because you had a chief sub who was there saying, I need to finish page 16 and get rid of it. So now, because we operate templates, we can see the entire publication at a glance, and we can just put stories onto whichever page we like, knowing full well we've got to fill every spare slot on our publication by deadline. But it does free us up to focus entirely upon the quality and placing the story on its merit. And when we drop a story now onto the template, it drops into the central subbing operation that we have. It's picked up then. Basically, there's a list of stories that drop in there. The subs on that team, they concentrate entirely on the words and the headlines and the pictures. They make it fit, they write the headline, they save it down, and it then updates on the page. So the whole thing is a very smooth process. And of course, one of the benefits is that those people that work within our subbing pool, our central subbing pool, they're freed from the task of having to fiddle with design programs, whether it's Cork Express or InDesign, whatever. They've got no responsibilities to that, so they're able to get through more copy, and again, as I say, puts the focus where it should be, which is on the words itself. I think the other big thing about the more centralised workflow that we've got now is that we plan ahead much more effectively than we've ever done. Because we use templates, we can drop templates on for a week on Thursday if we so wish, and we can start putting content out for that edition. And it is much more effective for us in terms of planning future editions. And what we found is that they're helping us to produce better thought out, better organised publications overall. The final thing I think that we've really benefited from with this new workflow is that we're able to share copy between publications much more effectively than we were able to previously. So previously, if you wanted to take a story that appeared in our daily, the Shropshire Star, and put it in one of our weekly titles, that was quite a big task, particularly if you wanted to go back and find all the pictures and all the words that went with it. Whereas now, we've got the central news desk, and so we can just, at the click of a button, share the content between whichever titles we wish. And that means that all of our titles have benefited from having all copy available to them almost instantly. It was previously possible, but it was such a laborious task that in reality it didn't happen. So that's been a major step forward.
Lovely, thanks Martin. So we've heard about templating, we've heard about partner hubs, and now centralised workflow. David, remote working, what difference has that made to your operation?
Well, I'd say the changes have been significant for us in that area. The fact that we can access all the same live system in the cloud means that we can dive into the system wherever and whatever time we want. For example, our sports team, this has meant the end to what we would call Crazy Monday. They used to have a morning dash for the finishing line with 9 live pages, full of weekend action, nothing that they could prepare for. Now, some of them dip in on a Sunday without needing to come into the office. Personally, it gives me the chance to examine the news flow at any point. Again, weekends are much less of a surprise factor when you can see what the weekend reporter has filed and you can just adjust the plans accordingly. Over the last few weeks, remote's come into its own. My number 2, who was less than happy to be cooped up at home with an elevated broken leg, having slipping on the frost, he was able to sit at home, do other behind the work scene from the comfort of his armchair. He arrived back at work last week to much acclaim, and I was certainly happy to see him. He'd even grown a beard because he couldn't manage to shave on one leg. But the flexibility of the reporters and photographers is also very real. They gain access to the system wherever there's Wi-Fi. Photographers now spend much less time on the road, much more time on the road and less time in the office, processing images and uploading. I actually still think there's some way to go to unlock the full potential of remote working. I'd like to see our reporters more community-based, having, taking head office calls to redirect it to their mobiles so that they can be immersed in the borough. I'm not really a fan of bums on seats. We have the technology. We need to make the technology work in our favour and not be slaves to it. I would also say we've not tested the remote work into its limits. We might live in what some of you call the frozen north. We actually had snow last Wednesday, but it's been more likely that we develop webbed feet than need snowshoes. And since we fitted the new system, we've been able to get in the office every day. It would be really interesting to see what would happen and how we coordinate our production if we were stuck at home. It would certainly be possible. I just hope that most of our people have remembered to take their laptops home. And now I've mentioned it, we'll probably get snow before Easter.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Martin. So there we have it. There the big changes made in the newsroom. And I suppose the million-dollar question is that how do magazine publishers go about applying those learnings to their own businesses? So, Sean, hearing what Martin and David had to say, how do you think the magazine sector goes about applying those learnings?
Well, the danger, I feel, is that they will just think, oh, this is just for newspapers, which of course it isn't. It's all about improving the work environment, making it more efficient, whether it's producing a print product or whether you're putting content out into website or social or media channels. And you've got the 4 pieces there. So many publishers haven't even got an asset management solution in place, so they're spending hours just looking for content. I think bringing this central workflow system usually involves asset management at its heart. It's almost a given that that exists. So you see endless small pieces of efficiency, and you start to automate the hell out of your production workflow. Certainly some of the publishers I'm working with now are doing that. Once you get this system in place, once you get the workflow system in place, if it's placed in the cloud, there are fringe benefits that haven't even been touched upon, not least of which, if it's a cloud-based system being monitored by and looked after by a third party, that reduces your IT infrastructure. It also vastly improves, David said about remote working, it vastly improves your business continuity. No longer do you have to worry, is that data center accessible? Because your workers can, from a general point, work from a laptop. And as you've heard, the dependency on products like Adobe InDesign or CS Suite become less and less important because you can continue to design using web web-based tools, and I see those tools growing and improving all along the way. Now, don't get me wrong, not all pages can be templated or should be templated. Originality and quality and flair are still very important, but there are pages. Every magazine I have ever come across has pages that should be templated, so you can flow content in and do the final finesse, whether it's word finesse or picture finesse. That should then free up this time for the pages that are valuable. Martin touched on it several times. There are pages that you want to spend more time on that should be designed and create time for your art directors and your subs to work on. At the moment, it's very arbitrary. It seems like the effort is equal, whether it's a horoscope page or a feature on fashion. I think a workflow system starts to help with that. So, how do we apply these learnings? Well, you need to have a good purpose for doing this. And the best purpose I can see is it brings together both the print and the digital workflows. It allows you to automate the mundane processes. It allows you to remove the bottlenecks, whether they're technical or whether they're cultural. Just bringing a new workflow system in gives you the opportunity to challenge the way you work, and magazine publishers should do this as a default, but they don't. Some do, but most don't. Most will go through one iteration and then stop. So the learnings are a good workflow system will help with the cultural changes that are required. It'll free up time. You won't become a slave to the templates because you can continually iterate and change those templates to be suitable. And another thing that I don't think was touched on too much was if you prepare your content at the start of the workflow, then one of the channels is the print. The other channels are your social and your media channels and your aggregators and your applications. If you've got it all sorted at the start of the process, that whole workflow, whether it's social or print, becomes so much easier. So I think there's lots to be learned here.
Sean, thank you very much. Martin, with the benefit of hindsight, after all the changes you've made, what are the potential pitfalls that publishers should look out for when embarking upon some of these changes?
Well, I think there's three that sort of struck me when I was thinking about the pitfalls. The first one Dave's already mentioned, and we had a similar experience, and that's get your templates right at the outset. That's really, really important. So make sure they work, make sure they're fit for purpose, make sure you've got enough. And I think that's really important. You can't spend too much time preparing your templates, because if you get that bit right, the rest of the workflow will become much more streamlined. I think the other thing that was really important for us was culture, and I think I would just say to anybody sort of thinking about embarking on a more template-driven workflow is don't underestimate the importance of changing the perception of the workflow, because I think working on templates for us was as much a psychological step as it was a sort of practical step. And I think there's a huge amount of nervousness and fear in the newsroom about the introduction of templates and what that would mean for the end product. And in reality, that hasn't come to pass in any way. As I mentioned before, if anything, our newspapers are probably tidier and more consistent in their look than they have been previously. But that was certainly a bit of a stumbling block for us, was convincing people to come along with us as we made those changes. We're saying, look, the introduction of templates isn't the end of the world, and I'd say don't underestimate the importance of that. I think the final thing, and again, we found this was an issue certainly in the early stages, was that there's a tendency among those with design and subbing experience to want to tweak the templates, and that can be minor things. Well, we'll just move this box and we'll make that look a bit better, and we'll make the copy fit. That's fine to some extent, and sometimes it's desirable, and sometimes we want that to happen. On other occasions, really, it's sort of, and it goes back to culture, I guess. It's clinging on to this feeling that that we are the designers, we want this creativity, and we can tweak and bend these templates. The danger with doing too much of that is if you start tweaking every template, then really you're not operating as efficiently as you can do, and then you start to get inconsistencies in the look of your pages, and you can run into technical difficulties as well if you started messing about with the templates too much. So I think that's definitely a potential pitfall, is people spending too much time for very little benefit tweaking templates on a sort of day-to-day basis.
All right, lovely. Thanks, Martin. And before we have a couple of questions, David, for publishers again thinking about embarking down this road, are there any quick wins to be had? I mean, everyone likes something which boosts some quick result, which boosts morale. Are there any quick wins out there?
Yeah, well, I mean, the obvious quick wins are probably sat with the accountant, but I won't touch on those so much. It's strange that Martin had got it as a pitfall, but for me, one of the change in practice and getting the mindset could actually be a quick win. If we get it right and we convince the people that it's not about drawing boxes all day long to produce very similar pages, then we're halfway there. And if you can get that efficiency right, you can then look at the capacity to deliver other products. And that's what we've done, is we've delivered new products into that same work team. It doesn't all have to be about cutting. I think that's what we've got to get away from. It's not all about making those savings of cuts. It can also be about redistribution of that labour. We changed our workforce to deliver copy to the page. The change has empowered reporters. They think more in the round about pictures and packages, and it's also changed the mindset around the news desk. Content editors, they've got more governance about where and when stories are used. That's important. The quickest win was a breakthrough of the traditional barriers that Martin mentioned earlier. Much more flow of information, much more understanding between what were two traditional opposing areas. And the other quick win for me was freeing up our photographers on the road. Now, I'm not sure where we go in the 21st century of media, but I do know that tackling some of the issues without the access to economies of scale is going to be difficult, very difficult. And if there's a bit of joined up thinking and shared workups could be part of that offer, then I think we can reshape the media and be relevant and be successful again.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, David. Now, I think we've got time for a few questions. First of all, in terms of return on investment for some of these changes, Martin, maybe start with you. What was the return on investment and how quickly were these realised?
I mean, if you mean in terms of savings, I guess as I say, we're looking at across our combined news desk and subs desk, I guess you'd be looking at probably about a third, I would say, in terms of numbers compared to where we were sort of 4 or 5 years ago. And in terms of timescales, as soon as you've got your workflow in place, you're able to bring those in pretty quickly. And I imagine the same was true for Dave and his team in Oldham. And I think the other thing, of course, is Dave's touched on as well. It isn't always just about a negative thing. It is about improving things as well. And certainly for us, one of the big improvements that we've seen, which is a return on investment, is that we're able to push out more pages more quickly with fewer people, but we're also able to push out more content digitally. We're able to push more to our whatever channels we need. We're able to push out more content to our weekly titles. We're able to share more for niche publications, which may bring in advertising revenue. So there are other sort of benefits to the implementation of this workflow.
Brilliant. David, have you got anything to add to that in terms of return on investment?
Similar sort of numbers. The numbers come immediately. You are literally, hitting staff numbers, so you can see the impact there. But I would reiterate the fact that it isn't just about savings. You need to look at it and what it frees you up to do. Sean was talking about, freeing up to make the show pages. That's just as vital. We shouldn't be spending as much time on that horoscope page, but that really bright fashion page in some magazine, if that's really that good and eye-catching, that's going to sell you more product. And you shouldn't be throwing, I'm not saying people throw that together, but we were getting to the stage where the body count was so low, from listening to Sean that, you know, we're in danger of losing sight of what it is we want to deliver, and what we want to deliver is the content in the best possible form, and I think we've helped do that. We've still got the challenges, and I don't think magazines will be any different to newspapers. But if magazines are thinking that they're frightened of this next step, I think Martin and myself would sit here and say, "What are you waiting for?"
Okay, so, Sean, when companies embark down, you know, major programs of change, there are cultural challenges. How would you summarise those? You know, getting buy-in from the team.
Yeah, it's the hardest part. The technologies as a whole are there. They're very sophisticated asset management and workflows and flat planning tools. They're reasonably mature and thankfully now becoming more affordable now that they're cloud-based. The hardest part, talk to any publisher, it's about the culture change from a print-centric workflow to a more efficient type of workflow. Having said that, those magazines where I have done this work, where I've implemented these changes, those teams where they then move to another magazine company can't go back. They want to stay with the system that's more efficient, and that is universal. So it's fear of change. If they bite the bullet, if they get on board with that change, they will see the benefits. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that it becomes a better world for them because they can focus on doing what they do best, whether it's being an art director or a chief sub or an editor. They just get more time to do what they love.
Okay, lovely. Martin, a quick question for you. For a monthly print membership journal that has an associated website carrying daily news content, to what extent do the online and print platforms need to carry different content, in your opinion, and what should the team look like to deliver this?
Well, I mean, I think it's really important to have some distinction between the different platforms that you serve and to have some understanding of how those audiences sort of respond to the content that you're putting out there. I mean, for me, I would say if you're looking at a monthly publication, you're looking at longer format reads, more in-depth analysis, more reflective pieces, I guess. And with a daily news update, you'd be looking at sort of snippets, breaking news, and shorter form stuff. That's not to say you wouldn't use some of the longer reads, but I think you'd probably try and sort of distinguish between the two. And I think, I mean, one of the benefits that we find, because obviously we're serving a breaking news channel, our website as well as our daily and weekly publications, is that we're able to put versions of stories online and then amend and adjust those to be more suited to print. And I think that's really one of the challenges for newsrooms at the moment, and I guess for magazines as well, is being able to tweak the copy, improve the copy, change the copy to suit whichever medium it's being intended to be published in. And I think that's probably something that getting your workflow right does give you that time to be able to do a bit more of that than you were able to previously. So I think you can distinguish, and it's certainly made more possible by a more regimented workflow.
Okay.
Can I add to that, James?
Absolutely.
We found that particularly in the business sector, where we've put a business magazine in the town as well as the newspaper, but we found that we're able to reprocess stuff written differently, and also the pictures as well. Our photographers have been going out with a much different eye, looking at magazine pictures and news pictures, and varying what appears where, what appears on the web, what appears in the glossy mag, and I think it's given, especially our picture desk or our photographers, it's given them a real appetite. You know, they're wanting the front page of the glossy, they're wanting the centre spread, and it's not just about line-up pictures in which you can get a bit in newspapers. You've got to do something a bit better in the mag sometimes, and they've risen to the challenge, I would say.
Excellent. Sean, a question about the costs of content management systems. Without name checking particular systems, are these systems beyond the reach of small publishers?
if you'd have asked me that even 12 months ago, I'd have said probably. Certainly end-to-end publishing systems, that's no longer the case. There are, go to your websites and do your research, but there are now end-to-end publishing systems that are affordable for all size of publishers, whether you have just 2 titles or whether you have 70 titles. They're now becoming accessible. So you'll have live flat plans, you'll have true asset management and rights management, but it won't stop there. Once you've got those systems in place, you'll start wanting to automate those other things that you don't like doing. So yes, they're affordable, and there are endless statistics about how you save money, what the return on investment is. With DAM, it is reckoned, and I forget where I get this. It wasn't Gartner, but it's a well-established group saying 1.8 hours a day per person in publishing, spending time finding things. That's a colossal amount of time. So if you put asset management, you're going to reduce that, and that's going to save you money. It's as simple as that.
So in a word, everything which you've been speaking about today is accessible for all publishers, whatever their size.
I believe so, yes.
Okay, brilliant. Just a quick question about social. Dave, maybe you could answer this. Has the advent of digital changed the relationship with your readers and communities, and how? If so, how?
Yes, I think it has. We do communicate with them through social media and through the website. I think the other thing is the instantaneous nature of that, especially news happenings. That's changed us forever, and I think we can never put this sort of cork back in the bottle there, can we? We have to do something different to match that. But what we have to bear in mind also is that we are seen still as the responsible purveyor of that news. So sometimes we shouldn't just jump at what social media is saying. We need to check it, we need to make sure it's right, and I'm not getting on the fake news bit, but some of it just starts to take off in a world of its own, and it isn't actually what it really turns out to be. So we shouldn't just slavishly follow. We need to make sure that we're still carrying out our checks and balances.
Lovely. I think we've got time for one more question. I'll put it to each of you, maybe David, starting with you again. If you could encapsulate everything that we've talked about today into a single message recommendation for magazine publishers, what would that be?
I honestly believed it was somewhere that was a jump into the unknown for me. I think if you jump through the door, there are a lot of people there on the other side who will hold your hand and help you.
Okay, lovely. Sean?
Now's the time. Now's the time to improve your processes. It will not only make life more acceptable, people actually going home on time, but I think you'll save money as well. Communication is at the heart of change. It's time to make those changes. And
Martin, the final word to you.
Well, I think for us, the new workflow, the template-driven workflow, has allowed us to improve what we've done digitally. It's enabled us to make the savings we need to make in the newsroom while still producing top-quality printed products. So I think my message would be, don't be afraid. It's time to embrace it and to see where it can get you, because I think there are huge opportunities.
Okay, brilliant. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. I'd like to thank our fantastic panel of Martin Wright, Sean Briggs and David Whaley. Thank you very much for some fantastic insights. I know you're very busy, so I really appreciate you sparing the time to talk to us today. A recording of today's webinar will be available tomorrow, and we'll email you a link with that. Again, I'd like to thank PCS for sponsoring today's webinar. As I said at the beginning, without them, it wouldn't have taken place. So thank you to PCS, and please do call them. Until next time, thank you very much for listening, and have a very good afternoon.